From Ted DiBiase Jr., whose fraud scandal tainted his father's legacy, to Sim Snuka, whose mistakes in the ring made people question his bloodline, to Eric Watts, whose undeserved championships got his father fired. These are WWE legends' sons who ruined their father's legacies, starting with David Flair. Some wrestling legacies are so towering that attempting to follow them borders on career suicide. Ric Flair won 16 world championships, defined what it meant to be a professional wrestler for multiple generations, and earned the title of Nature Boy through decades of unparalleled excellence. That impossible burden fell to David Flair, Ric's eldest son, who discovered the crushing weight of expectations during his time in WCW during the late 1990s and early 2000s. What was meant to be a brief cameo alongside his legendary father transformed into a full-blown nightmare of nepotism, failed pushes, and some of the most embarrassing storylines in wrestling history that would permanently tarnish the prestigious Flair name. With barely any training after being rushed through WCW's power plant developmental system, David was thrust into prominent storylines that required abilities he simply never possessed. The infamous Insanity storyline forced his father, then still a top draw in his 50s, to sell vulnerability and humiliation at the hands of his own inexperienced son. This included segments where David committed Ric to a mental asylum on screen, degrading one of wrestling's greatest characters for the sake of pushing someone who clearly wasn't ready. He seduced valets like Tori Wilson and Stacy Keibler in romantic angles that came across as painfully awkward, and he collected championship gold that fans overwhelmingly viewed as unearned handouts tied purely to his last name. Even years into his career, the fundamental problem remained unchanged. David simply never grasped the business the way his father had mastered it, delivering matches that followed the same basic blueprint without any of the psychology or charisma that made Ric legendary.
He didn't understand the business. See, if you watch Flair's matches toward the end, every match is the same. Every match is the same blueprint for every match he had.
The damage to Ric Flair's legacy came from how David's failures embodied WCW's creative bankruptcy. By highlighting nepotism at its worst and forcing Ric into degrading storylines, David permanently associated the prestigious Flair name with second-generation disappointment. While the Nature Boy's strut and woo remain iconic, discussions inevitably circle back to how his son became the poster child for everything wrong with wrestling nepotism. While David Flair became synonymous with unearned pushes in WCW, this next wrestler would squander his opportunities in WWE before real-life scandals made his father's villainous gimmick look prophetic. Ted DiBiase Jr. Few gimmicks in wrestling history achieved the perfect blend of heat and entertainment, quite like the $1 Million Man. Ted DiBiase Sr. built his legendary career on unparalleled microphone skills, psychological heel work, and a character that perfectly embodied greed and arrogance. "Everybody's got a price" became one of wrestling's most memorable catchphrases, and his maniacal laugh haunted babyfaces throughout the late 1980s and early 1990s. That iconic legacy fell to Ted DiBiase Jr., the son tasked with carrying forward one of wrestling's most beloved villain personas. Despite inheriting physical tools, a prestigious name, and significant WWE investment, Ted Jr. failed to capture any of that essence, leading to mid-card stagnation and an abrupt retirement that disappointed everyone who believed in his potential. Ted Jr. debuted in 2008 as part of Legacy alongside Randy Orton and Cody Rhodes, winning tag team championships and participating in high-profile feuds against top acts like Triple H, DX, and John Cena. But after Legacy dissolved in 2010, his singles push faltered dramatically. WWE attempted to revive his father's gimmick with the $1 Million Championship, complete with the Fortunate Son entrance theme and arrogant promos about privilege. Ted Jr.'s delivery lacked the biting charisma of his father's legendary mantra, coming across as bland and entitled without the menacing edge. By 2011-2013, he was relegated to jobber status, a far cry from the main event expectations his lineage demanded. The most remarkable part of Ted Jr.'s story is that he walked away from a 5-year contract extension. He was battling internal struggles that made the wrestling grind unbearable, choosing family over fame at the peak of what should have been his prime years.
I was offered another 5-year deal, was generous, and when it came down to it, I was battling internally, some things personally. that it's a lot easier for me to talk about now. Mental health issues, it's a big topic, going through some depression and anxiety, but also being a new father.
However, the real lasting damage came years later when Ted Jr. became embroiled in a massive Mississippi welfare fraud scandal, pleading guilty to federal charges involving the misappropriation of millions in public funds meant for needy families. This real-life greed scandal drew direct parallels to the $1 Million Man character. Life imitated art in the worst possible way, permanently tarnishing one of wrestling's most revered names with headlines about an actual con man bearing the DiBiase name. While Ted DiBiase Jr.'s legacy was damaged by scandals both in and out of the ring, this next person inherited the Mr. Perfect moniker, only to prove that perfection definitely skips a generation. Curtis Axel. Perfection is an impossible standard, but Curt Hennig made it look achievable throughout his legendary career. Mr. Perfect was a technical genius, renowned for his flawless execution, iconic, undefeated vignettes showcasing athletic brilliance, and an aura of arrogance backed by genuine skill that made him one of the most respected performers of his era. The burden of continuing that flawless legacy fell to Curtis Axel, born Joseph Curtis Hennig, who spent 11 years in WWE developmental and on the main roster cycling through failed repackages and mid-card stagnation. His solid technical ability was constantly overshadowed by a profound lack of charisma and an inability to escape his father's towering shadow, making him a case study in how bloodline alone cannot manufacture stardom. Originally saddled with the absurd name Michael McGillicuddy, Curtis was buried before he even started, the name seemingly designed to disconnect him from any legacy whatsoever, and he fought desperately for 2 years just to get a proper rebranding that would honor his lineage. The 2013 repackaging as Curtis Axel showed initial promise. Aligning with Paul Heyman alongside CM Punk and Brock Lesnar positioned him among elite company, and he won the Intercontinental Championship, echoing his father's IC title success. But the Heyman association fizzled when Punk departed, leaving Curtis directionless and adrift in the mid-card. Subsequent attempts like Axelmania and the comedic B-Team with Bo Dallas ensured he never escaped mid-card irrelevance, becoming a punchline rather than a main eventer. The pressure of the perfect name was, as Curtis himself admitted, a cursed blessing that haunted every promo and every match. His robotic style invited constant, unflattering comparisons, and fans universally noted his bland delivery and complete absence of the it factor. WWE released him in April 2020 amid pandemic cuts, and now discussions of Mr. Perfect's greatness inevitably pivot to what happened with his son. The answer writes itself in disappointment. While inheriting the perfect legacy proved impossible for Curtis Axel, this next wrestler had the physical tools to carry on the bad guy mystique, but discovered that cool can't be taught or inherited. Cody Hall. Cool cannot be manufactured, bottled, or passed down through genetics. Scott Hall proved this by revolutionizing heel dynamics as Razor Ramon, and later becoming a foundational figure in the NWO, leaving behind a legacy of effortless swagger, iconic catchphrases, and magnetic charisma that defined an entire era of professional wrestling. That impossibly cool legacy was meant to continue through Cody Hall, Scott's towering son who stood 6'8", with the athletic build to potentially extend his father's impact into a new generation. Instead, Cody's run was marked by inexperience, poor performances, injury, and a quick fade from prominence that reinforced just how unique and irreplaceable his father's talent truly was. The big break came in 2015 when New Japan Pro Wrestling signed Cody and immediately inserted him into the Bullet Club, the faction that spiritually evoked NWO glory. Complete with toothpick tosses and hey yo surveys to directly channel Razor Ramon, it was positioned as a torch-passing moment, but the push exposed Cody's severe limitations in brutal fashion. Stiff and unsafe in-ring work, lack of timing, poor selling, and zero crowd connection plagued his matches despite the gimmick nods. Fans and critics noted he was rushed into the spot due to name value rather than actual readiness. Then came the neck injury that derailed everything. Cody sustained the damage while catching a routine dive from a wrestler he had worked with countless times before, ending his NJPW tenure in the most unfortunate way possible. Despite hoping WWE might eventually come calling after years of working in Japan and proving himself on the international stage, Cody revealed that scouts saw him perform but never showed any interest whatsoever. The rejection stung deeply. The bad guy's legacy of effortless cool now carries an asterisk. Cody proved that swagger can't be inherited, only earned through that indefinable quality that makes legends. While Cody Hall and the Hall name faded quietly from the wrestling landscape, this next wrestler's entire AEW run felt like one prolonged botch that embarrassed a Four Horsemen legend, Brock Anderson. The Four Horsemen remain professional wrestling's most legendary faction, and few members embodied their ruthless excellence quite like the Enforcer. Arn Anderson built his reputation on decades of technical prowess, impeccable psychology, and backstage wisdom that made him one of the most respected figures in the industry. That Enforcer legacy was expected to continue through Brock Anderson, Arn's son, who had a brief but underwhelming stint in AEW from 2021 to 2023. His tenure was marked by limited exposure, green performances, and overwhelming perceptions of nepotism due to his father's prominent coaching role with the company. What should have been a passing of the torch instead became a cautionary tale about rushed pushes. Brock's debut teaming with his legendary father against the Factory generated genuine buzz, evoking Horseman nostalgia and suggesting great things ahead. But critics panned Brock's subsequent matches for stiffness, lack of polish, and zero crowd engagement despite the family name being announced before every bout. By 2022-2023, appearances dwindled to sporadic dark tapings with no singles push or meaningful storylines. He quietly faded from television, while fans on forums consistently labeled him a perfect example of nepotism. The relationship between father and son regarding wrestling accomplishments remained surprisingly complicated. Brock apparently never once verbally acknowledged his father's accomplishments, maintaining the same demeanor that defined his in-ring career. When Brock's contract expired in October 2023, he turned down a renewal offer, citing frustration with AEW's lack of dedicated training facilities for young talent. His prominent but unfulfilling run embodied the nepotism criticisms that plagued AEW during roster bloat. Arn Anderson's Enforcer legacy now includes a footnote about an heir who couldn't enforce his own relevance in the modern wrestling landscape. While Brock Anderson and the Anderson name suffered from obvious nepotism in AEW, this next person's TNA run proved that even alignment with an Olympic gold medalist couldn't save a career built on family connections rather than talent. Wes Brisco. Wrestling royalty extends beyond the ring, and few families contributed more behind the scenes than the Briscos. Gerald Brisco earned his Hall of Fame status through multiple NWA and WWF tag team titles, decades as a WWE backstage agent, and memorable on-screen moments as one half of the iconic Stooges comedy duo with Pat Patterson. That legacy of technical excellence and industry respect was meant to continue through Wes Brisco, Gerald's son, whose career across WWE developmental and TNA is widely regarded as a classic case of nepotism-fueled opportunities exposing severe limitations. Every push he received only served to embarrass the family legacy further. In WWE's FCW developmental, Wes won tag team championships with Xavier Woods, but never reached the main roster despite his father's influential backstage position. He was released in 2011 without fanfare, another developmental casualty who couldn't translate potential into television presence. The bigger spotlight came in TNA via the 2012 Gut Check initiative, where Wes was positioned as Kurt Angle's hand-picked protege. Being endorsed by an Olympic gold medalist and legitimate wrestling legend should have guaranteed success. Wes's betrayal of Angle to join the Aces and Eights faction, positioned as TNA's answer to the NWO, should have been a star-making heel turn. Instead, performances drew heavy criticism for awkward selling, unsafe spots, generic promos, and a bland biker persona that failed to generate any meaningful heat. Aces and Eights devolved into booking chaos and won Wrestling Observer's Worst Gimmick award multiple years running. Wes lingered in mid-card obscurity before his 2014 release. Post-TNA, Wes found some fulfillment working internationally, experiencing different wrestling cultures that WWE and TNA never offered him the opportunity to explore. Despite these experiences, Wes never regained prominence in any major American promotion. The storied Brisco name became permanently associated with wasted potential, rather than the earned greatness his father and Uncle Jack represented throughout their legendary careers. While Wes Brisco and the Brisco name faded through failed faction work, Manu, born Afa Anoa'i Jr., who was positioned as a third-generation enforcer trialing for Randy Orton's Legacy stable in 2008. But Manu's rushed main roster push exposed glaring inexperience and poor in-ring work, resulting in a rapid release that embarrassed the family name. WWE emphasized Manu's Samoan heritage through barefoot wrestling, headbutts, and power moves designed to evoke the wild Samoan's fearsome aura. However, Manu's performances were heavily criticized for slow pacing, unsafe stiffness, and wooden promos that failed to connect with audiences expecting another dominant Anoa'i. Orton fired both Manu and Sim Snuka from Legacy through brutal on-screen beatdowns that reflected real backstage disappointment with their development. The frustration of trying to find the right balance between aggression and restraint became an impossible task. Manu received contradictory feedback that ultimately cost him his job. The original plan, after being kicked out of Legacy, offered a glimmer of hope. A tag team repackage with Snuka could have salvaged both careers and given them time to develop away from the main event spotlight. The Anoa'i dynasty continues to dominate modern wrestling through Roman Reigns' historic championship reign, but discussions of the family's unprecedented success now include an asterisk. Manu remains the one who didn't make it, the rare weak link in wrestling's strongest bloodline. While Manu and the Anoa'i family name survived one disappointing son, this next person's blatant push actually contributed to his legendary father's firing and became the gold standard for destructive wrestling nepotism. Eric Watts. Non-Stasiak. Championship legacies in professional